Showtime. Your show will go live in 5 seconds. Four, three, two, one. Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, everybody. This is Yaron Brook. You're listening to Yaron Brook Show. And today is episode 7 of my news briefing. Still don't have a permanent name. I apologize. It just seems like I just get busier and busier and busier and don't have time to actually do the planning and thinking necessary to actually get a brand new name for this show. We will get there. We will get there. It's coming. For now, Iran's news briefing is not bad. You have to admit, not bad. All right, it's reflective of the truth. All right, we're gonna run down some news stories. I'm gonna run down the news stories. We'll leave all the questions to the end, if there are any. So if you want to ask a question, you can call in 347-324-3075. But you have to press 1 after you call to get in the queue to ask a question. 347-324-3075, and then press 1 to get in the queue. All right. Tax bill was passed today, or it looks like it was passed by the House, and it looks like it's going to be voted on in the Senate tonight, so it should be passed by tonight. So I've talked enough about taxes. I don't want to talk anymore about taxes. But hey, it was passed. Now the hard work starts, and that is the real hard work, which means cutting spending. So now that the Republicans have done what all Republicans do, what Republicans always do whenever they get into a position of power, cut taxes. Now what are they going to do with it? They need to cut spending, which they never, ever, ever do. But of course, what they promised the Tea Party when it was around that they would do, anyway, we're stuck with lower taxes, but not lower spending. So I'm happy with, I guess, lower taxes, although I think that in California, my taxes will go up because the deduction for state, local, and property taxes is being capped. But I'm taking care of that. I'm dealing with that. We'll talk about that another time. But I'm happy for all you guys. If you don't live in California, you don't live in New York, or if you're not in the top marginal tax rate, your taxes were cut. So good for you. You get to pay less taxes. That's good news. All right, a bit of good news. Actually, really good news from not from the United States, actually from Latin America. The good news is from Chile. I don't know how many of you followed because it wasn't really in the news in the United States. But there was a presidential election on was it Sunday? I think on Sunday in Chile, and for 4 years, Chile. Well, let's do a quick history of Chile. 1980, Chile was the poorest country in Latin America, poorest country on a per capita basis in the whole of South America. And it, almost by accident, started to institute good economic policies. The accident was that Pinochet, the dictator, kind of looked around and said, well, this isn't working. I need to do something different. And he looked for something different, something new. And there was a group of economists trained at the University of Chicago under Milton Friedman, teaching at some of the universities in Chile, And he actually said to these guys, do you guys think you could do better? And remember, Pinochet had already been, at the helm of Chile for like 6 years, and the economy was a disaster. And he basically handed over control of the economy to this group of, what came to be called the Chicago Boys, a group of Chicago-trained economists, and gave them basically carte blanche to truly reform the Chilean economy, which they then went on to do, to privatize their social security system, something we've never been able to do in this country. They did in Chile. They privatized natural resources. They privatized much of the economy. They did away with regulations. They reduced social programs. They really, really substantially changed Chile. And within 20, 25 years, Chile became the richest country in Latin America. Richest country in Latin America. Certainly by 2014, Chile was thriving, was growing at some of the fastest rates in the world of economic growth. And again, richest country on a per capita basis in the whole of Latin America, doing phenomenally well. And at the same time, you probably all know the story of Venezuela, which when Chile was the poorest country in Latin America, Venezuela was the richest country in Latin America. More oil reserves than Saudi Arabia, the largest oil reserves in the world. And Venezuela just basically adopted socialism, the opposite of what Chile did, and became the poorest country in Latin America. So you had this beautiful experiment going on. One country adopting pro-market, pro-capitalist, really good policies, and the other country rich in natural resources, but adopting socialist policies. And one went from being rich to being poor, and the one went from being poor to being rich. And you know which is which, because the one that adopted capitalism became rich, and the one that adopted socialism became poor. And there you have another example in human history of the success of capitalism, and everybody still ignores that. And then in 2014, Chile elected a socialist, a female president who is a socialist, as president. Her name is Bachelet. She is an admirer. Is an admirer of Fidel Castro, and she basically spent the 4 years of her administration dismantling Chile's liberal economic model, and trying to, she railed at every opportunity against private enterprise, about the private economy, about private businesses, and was just ruled as a socialist, and was really dismantling, deep dismantling of Chile's economy. Now, not surprising, GDP plummeted to only growth of 1.8%. That was blamed on commodity prices, but if you look a little deeper into it, while Chile exports copper, it imports most of its other commodities. Those prices were cheaper. That should have helped Chile, not hurt Chile. So socialism was experimented with in Chile in a small scale. And actually, in this election, I guess she didn't run, or maybe there's term limits. But this election was between Sebastián Pinera, who was the president between 2010 and 2014. Relatively free market. I mean, not one of the really good guys, but relatively free market. I wish it was José Pinera. José Pinera is a real advocate for about as close to capitalism as you can get, but he wasn't running. This was Sebastián Pinera. So it was pretty good. Not great, but pretty good. Ran on a platform of return to market reforms and restoring economic growth through market reforms, through more capitalism. And versus a leftist, Alejandro Guilliero, I slaughtered that name, who again ran on kind of a socialist light platform. And Pinera, should have won. When he was president, the economy grew, I think, by 5 point something percent every year. But for a while there, it looked pretty iffy. It looked like the socialist was going to win, There was a period there where I was actually predicting that the socialists would win. But the good news is the socialists lost and Piñera won, and by 55% of the votes, a significant margin of victory. And it's exciting because Chile is back on the path of economic growth. One of the things that happened between, 1990 and 2015 is in 1990, the poverty rate in Chile was 68%. Wow. Almost 70% of the Chilean population in 1990 was poor, as defined by the United Nations. By 2015, just after Piñera left office, the rate was 11.7. So you can see how capitalism is the only system and the most effective system, the only system to reduce poverty. Dramatic reduction in poverty between 1990 and 2015 because of the market policies, the pro-free market policies adopted by Chilean governments during that period of time. So, I'm excited to watch. I'm interested in Latin America. I've traveled quite a bit to Latin America. I'll be going to Latin America again in April. I'll be visiting Argentina and Brazil, speaking there. I've never been to Chile. I'm waiting for the invitation to come and speak in Chile. I'd love to speak one day in Chile. It's a fascinating country, and it's one of the most dramatic turnarounds from a socialist hell with poverty over 70% in the 1970s to one of the freest economies in the world, freer, based on the Economic Freedom Index, freer than the United States of America from an economics perspective. Privatized Social Security, how much better can you get? So a very exciting place. Somebody posted here that Reuters, one of the comments Reuters make was, Chile election ends era of female presidents in Latin America. As if that's the essential. Yeah. As if that's the essential. It should have said, it would have been great if this election ended the era of socialist presidents. That would be a real title. But of course, socialism is alive and well, particularly in Venezuela, in Latin America. So that hasn't ended. But it is true that women have lost recently. So you had the female president of Brazil impeached over corruption charges. Basically, she was accused of fudging the budget numbers, which every politician in the world is guilty of, but she was impeached. Wouldn't it be great if we could impeach American presidents and congressmen and senators for fudging budget numbers? I mean, every single one of them in the last 30 years at least would be fired from their job based on that criteria. And of course, the Kirchner, the president of Argentina, lost an election and is now, as I described a couple of weeks ago, under indictment for treason in Argentina. So yeah, the really leftist, really, really bad female presidents in Latin America are losing their jobs. Yay for that. I'm really excited about that. All right. So that is Venezuela, and that is Chile. I don't have any good news about Venezuela. I'm just reading more and more stories about how bad things are there and how people are really starving and how so unbelievably sad all that is. So no good news, unfortunately, coming out of Venezuela these days. Somebody wrote here, Venezuela is currently the murder capital of the world. Not surprising, but according to, I don't know if you knew this, but in the Soviet Union, the police were not allowed to investigate murders because under communism there was no murder. It was a utopian society in which there couldn't be murders. Or murder was a capitalist phenomenon. And there was a movie I saw about an investigator, a serial killer during the Soviet Union, based, I think, on a true story, and how it was constantly repressed by the highest ups because there wasn't supposed to be serial killers, because in communism they can't be. It's all about capitalism. So Venezuela, again, proving that under communism there's more murder than anywhere, not just by the official government, but also by gangs looking for food. I mean, that's what happens when society breaks apart, what you get is more and more violence. One of my arguments against anarchy is when you have no monopoly over the use of force, all you get is gangs, roaming gangs, and a dramatic increase in violence. All right. I read this. I got this good question. Let me take this question. I got this good question in email from Peter Morales, who's answered a question about from him one of the previous shows about how do you do research? Can you just Google stuff? And he's got a follow up to that, which I thought was a good follow up. So the question is, how much reliability do you attribute to information in general and specifically statistics put out by the government? Whether it is crime statistics given by the FBI or employment statistics given by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, would you consider statistics given out by the government to be reliable and thus to make determinations off of? So I think you have to separate two things here. The first thing is you have to know what it is that the government is actually reporting. So my view is that yes, the numbers that they report are true. The question is the number being reported actually reflective of what they claim it is reflective? So you always have to read the fine print with government numbers. I mean, you should always read the fine print wherever people are using statistics or data, because you'll often be shocked at the difference between the headline and what's actually being reported. So, I mean, there are lots of examples about this. So yeah, I trust the numbers partially because the people doing the numbers are mostly impartial statisticians and economists. They don't really care. The people who define the problem are the one who care, and therefore the statistics are often reflective of the question being asked. But you need to dig deeper and figure out what is the question being asked that these numbers are actually reflecting. Let me give you an example. Unemployment. Well, what does unemployment mean? But, you know, when the casual observer looks at the unemployment number, so there are two issues with unemployment. One is what is it measuring? And two, how are they calculating it? And I'll get to that. So unemployment. So for example, what does it measure? When a layman hears unemployment, what you associate that with, well, how many people don't have jobs? We have 350 million people in the U.S. X number of those are of working age. And some people just don't work because they're, let's say, housewives, they work at home. Other than that, how many of those eligible to work in the workforce are actually employed? And then, you know, that's what you assume the unemployment number would give you. But that's not what the headline, what I'll call the main unemployment number reflects. What the unemployment number reflects is how many people are looking for work and haven't found it. So if you've given up on looking, or if you just don't feel like looking, or then your number's not reflected in there. Now, what's interesting is the government does report the more expansive definition, but you have to go look for it. You have to dig for it. So you have to, if you Google alternative measures of unemployment in the U.S., you'll get a government chart with like 5-6 different measures of unemployment that the government produces and publishes, but it only reports the one number, the number of people looking for work and who haven't found any. So the real numbers or the interesting numbers or the other numbers are all there. For example, the participation rate, that's just one rate. There are a lot of different ways to slice this depending on the question you're asking. You might be interested in different numbers. But so the numbers are there and the government actually has them. the media doesn't report necessarily the relevant numbers, and the government doesn't report them as the headline number as their main focus. So, but you can find them. If you do the research, you can find them. So the government is aggregating these statistics. Now, in addition, so that's one problem. The second problem is, how do they collect the data? I mean, how do you know how many people are unemployed? And again, that's a very noisy process and a very noisy number. That's why they change it constantly. They refine it constantly. So, for example, a lot of this, how many new jobs were created, they keep reporting. Just recently, they reported 220,000 jobs were created last month. Well, how do they know that? Based on a survey of employers. But that's very messy and noisy. So what happens is the next month, they adjust the month before, upwards or downwards, based on more information that they gain. So it's very difficult to evaluate these numbers because they're moving all the time. They adjust them all the time. They're not actual counts. They're estimates. Now, they're pretty good estimates. They have world-class statisticians working at the government. There's no question about that. But, you have to know what is actually being measured. You have to read the fine print. Otherwise, you can't use the numbers. And you have to realize that just because they reported 220,000 doesn't mean that's a real number. And it could be revised up 100,000 or down 100,000 next month. Now, the other thing is that the critics always make it about politics. And I find this fascinating. But this is typical of Donald Trump, right? So when Donald Trump was running for president, he said, I don't believe the unemployment numbers. All these employment numbers, all these numbers that the government produces, they're all suspect. They're all wrong. It's all the Obama administration. It's all nonsense, right? Trump comes in, and now the numbers are gospel. They're absolutely true because they've been good numbers, relatively speaking, for him, right? So nobody's changed in the Bureau. The people who calculated are the same people. The people who are running the Bureau are the same people. Nothing's changed. But because now it's in his favor, the numbers are good. When he was not in his favor, when he was running to be elected, they were bad. Let me also say something about crime statistics, because you asked specifically. I mean, again, you have to read the fine print. What are they actually measuring? And is the definition of what they're measuring the same today as it was in the past? Aggravated assault. Is aggravated assault defined today the same as it was in the 70s? Are we comparing apples to apples? When you do a timeline, were they using the same reporting mechanism way back in the past as they do today? One of the challenges, for example, is the certain numbers that the FBI does not get. Police shootings. There's very, very little information about police shootings. There's very, very little information about police shootings and race to determine whether there really is racism or not among police officers that causes them to shoot blacks more than whites. The answer is, for the most part, we don't know because the data is not really there. And anybody who claims that data is definitive is just wrong. When you actually research the data, it's very, very difficult to find. It's not difficult to find. It's just not being accumulated properly. Now, there are all kinds of attempts now to create databases that accumulate this kind of data, but it's still very messy, and it hasn't been accumulated. So part of the problem is sometimes the data you're looking for is not there, and what you find are proxies that are not really good proxies for what you're looking at. This is certainly true of crime, although generally I trust the crime, but there is this phenomena, particularly on lower level crime. Now, murder is easy to categorize, and it's hard to miss. When somebody dies, they die. And there's usually an investigation, And, usually it's hard not to categorize a murder as murder, although there have been cases where they haven't been. But other crimes, property crimes, other crimes are often underreported by the population, but also ignored sometimes by the police and reclassified maybe as something different than what they are, depending on the incentives. One of my favorite television shows ever is a show called The Wire. And I remember one of the seasons was about the incentives created in how to report crimes. And that if you provide the police with the wrong incentives, they won't actually reduce crime, they'll just underreport crime. So they'll pretend that there's less crime. They'll recategorize things in order to reduce the amount of, violent crime and things like that, and just not report stuff, or again, classification matters. So again, you have to be careful in the statistics, but the fact is that the FBI crime statistics are probably the best crime statistics we have out there. Again, the government data is the best data we have on many of these things, but you have to read the fine print. You have to know exactly what's being reported. Let me give you another example, which again, referring to Donald Trump and to, what's her name, the conservative female that I can't stand, that I hate. Anyway, I forgot her name. The writes about immigration, the illegal immigration. I mean, a lot of conservatives love to talk about how many illegal immigrants, that illegal immigrants are criminals. Donald Trump talks about this all the time. Ann Coulter talks about this all the time. And yet, if you actually look for the statistics, they don't exist. Now, to some extent, the Cato Institute is guilty of the reverse. They take whatever statistics exist to try to prove that illegal immigrants commit far less crimes than, let's say, American-born citizens. I don't think either one know what they're talking about. I don't think anybody knows. I'm more sympathetic, I have to say, to the Cato numbers, but because I think they do a better job. But nobody knows. I have looked into this. I've researched the data, and again, when you read like the Cato reports or some of Ann Coulter's, you have to look for the sources. And then when you look for the sources, you have to read the footnotes. And when you read the footnotes, you discover that they don't know what the hell they're talking about. There is no epidemic of crime by illegals that we know of, because we don't, first of all, I don't think it exists, there's no documented one. There's no proof. There's zero proof. There's zero evidence of it. So the same, by the way, no, I mean, illegal immigrants are not committing a crime. It's not a criminal act to cross the border. Not in the same way, and it's certainly not a violent act. So I don't consider immigration a crime in the same sense that I consider rape, murder, property crimes a crime. I mean, it's not, it's completely different. It's the same, to me, illegal immigration is the same thing as drinking during Prohibition, smoking pot when pot is illegal. That's the kind of misdemeanor that illegal immigration is. Anyway, that's not my point. I don't want to debate immigration right now. The point is that those who argue that illegal immigrants commit all these crimes don't have any evidence. The data is not there. It's not being accumulated. Now, it should be accumulated. It would be interesting to know, and it could be important to know, but for political reasons and a variety of reasons, it's not being accumulated. It's not being addressed. The same, by the way, we don't know the number of illegal immigrants, although the best estimate put it at 11 million people, and yet people like Ann Coulter continuously talk about 30 million illegal immigrants. They have no evidence of that number. The best number based on that Pew puts out, the best number based on government numbers, the best number based on whatever is 30 million, right? I'm not going to get into a debate right now on immigration. You can call and ask me if you want. If you have a question, I know there's some people on YouTube with questions. Call in and ask, but I'm not going to respond to that. All right, I will answer those questions. In other words, yes, I view government. I view any statistics produced by anybody with a certain level of suspicion. I always read the fine print, as I think you should. Figure out what's their data source. Figure out what exactly are they measuring. Think about, is the statistic they're reporting actually a measurement of what they purport to be measuring? Statistics data is not is suspicious. Now, so that's kind of the numbers, the statistics. Other information provided by the government, I mean, it depends. On certain issues, I don't trust them at all. We've seen the number of lies coming out of the Pentagon with regard to the war on terrorism, and I think the worse our foreign policy is, the weaker we use our military, the more we use our military for non-military purposes, the greater the rules of engagement, the more the Pentagon's going to lie, because it's embarrassed about the truth. It's embarrassed about the truth. So there's certain issues that I'm suspicious about when the government reports, and I don't care Democrats, Republicans, I don't trust any of them. Again, you have to use your knowledge. I won't say common sense. Your knowledge is integrated. In my view, the best number, somebody's asking illegal immigrants, my view, by far, the best number on illegal immigrants is 11 million. And by the way, there's no question that the number of illegal immigrants has not changed since 2007. So the number of illegal immigrants in the United States peaked in 2007, went down from 2008 to around 2012, 2013, and then started slowly going up until last year, and then has been trickling upwards or maybe flat since Trump was elected. So fewer people are trying to cross the border since Trump was elected. But there was negative illegal immigration. That is, illegals were returning to Mexico and to other Latin American countries during the Great Recession from 2008 through to 2012. Again, all the hysteria, all the propaganda, all the BS, complete, utter, unequivocal BS that came out of Trump and out of Ann Coulter and out of all the anti-immigration people about illegal immigration was just that, BS nonsense and made-up statistics. But I don't trust. I always question government statistics and government information. I question everybody's information. I really do. You have to question the New York Times, and you have to question Fox, and you have to question Breitbart, and you have to question the Washington Post. You have to question them all, and that's why I've emphasized over and over again: multiple sources, integrate with existing knowledge, and if a topic is important, do deep research. Deep research. I don't know of anybody on the anti-immigration side that has presented data that is valuable and really worth talking about. And the same thing, by the way, in Europe. There's BS on both sides. So is there what's called a rape epidemic in Sweden, or isn't there a rape epidemic in Sweden? Is almost, and by Muslim immigrants, of course, is almost impossible to figure out. I mean, I suspect there is some, but it's almost impossible to figure out what's actually going on because the police hide information, the media doesn't report information, but on the other hand, the xenophobic anti-immigration elements fudge the information, so you get fudging on all sides. Trump, So I I'm distracted by the chats. Trump is clearly anti-immigration and his support, anti-immigration, not anti-illegal immigration, anti-immigration, and his support for cutting legal immigration in half is proof of that. I mean, he wants to cut, he supported he was on television supporting the Republicans who want to cut legal immigration by exactly 50%. That's anti-immigration in my book. Now, I'm anti this chain immigration as well, but I'm not anti-immigration. So what I would propose is doing away or reducing chain immigration and replacing it with what you would consider pro-jobs immigration, pro-growth immigration, legal job immigration, expanding that dramatically. But he's not for that, and very few Republicans are. Trump and his administration, Jeff Sessions and a number of other people in this administration are clearly, unequivocally, stop listening to the propaganda. They are anti-immigration. All right, and they proved it with the bill that they announced, and they prove it with their hostility to H-1B visas, which are legal visas, and yet they're hostile to them. They talk negatively about them. Even Ted Cruz was anti-H-1B visa, which is another one. All right, we're going to stop there. We covered a few topics. That's good. Immigration we'll have to cover more thoroughly in a different topic. We're going to take a caller. I know there are a couple of callers there, but you're not in the queue for questions because you haven't pressed 1. So if you want, just repeat it. If you want to ask a question, press 1. You unpressed the 1. So whoever was pressed before, you just unpressed yourself. So press 1 again because I lost you in your queue. You know, repeating something over and over again doesn't make it true. In objectivism, in reality, we believe in evidence and presenting an argument, not just in just repeating things. Anyway. All right. Hi, you're in the Yaron Book Show. Who's this?
Hi, this is Jennifer in Michigan.
Hey, Jennifer. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. What's up?
In regards to spending, you know how they have a hard time cutting spending, obviously. If you could cut one area, just one thing, what would you cut? I would cut all business subsidies.
Yeah, I mean, I would cut all business subsidies. That would be the first thing I'd cut. All the different, and that includes, I would have to redo the tax bill because the tax bill includes so much loopholes and all this crap. So I would completely cut all business subsidies. That's where you would start. What you want is to eliminate cronyism, and that gives you then the moral high ground to go ahead and do all the rest that needs to be done. But they always go after the poor. They always start with welfare, and that's what the Republicans, by the way, are going to do next. They're going to do welfare reform. The first bill I would pass, and I've said this on many occasions, is the End Cronyism Bill, which would include deregulation, cutting all government subsidies for business, including farm subsidies, and eliminating all loopholes from the corporate tax code, so including the ones that they just passed today. Thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate the call.
Thank you.
All right, we got one other caller. Hi, you're on the Yaron Book Show.
Hey, am I on?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I actually just got on, so I don't really know what you're talking about. I heard you say something about immigration.
You can ask a question about anything you want to ask.
This is Michael, by the way.
Hey, Michael. How's it going?
Hey.
You're back again.
Okay. Let me think. Okay, so...
You don't have to ask a question. There are other people who are calling on.
No.
Let me just remind those who are calling in, if you want to ask a question, press 1. I see a bunch of people calling in and not pressing 1. And it doesn't put you in the queue to ask a question. All right, there we go. All right, go ahead, Michael.
Okay.
Man, I have to repeat
tonight,
myself.
the Senate is debating the tax cut.
Yes.
The tax bill.
Yes.
I'm trying to make it a point to read each bill,
yes.
each HR that comes to the floor.
Good luck.
When it leaves committee, and when well, I know it's hard when you're trying to read a 200-page tax bill in like an hour. But I'm a pretty efficient reader, and I was able to do it for the first 2 times. And then after they made changes, I just kind of relied on summaries from people that I trust. And I see all these lies being portrayed about the bill on the Dem side. I think it should be illegal, honestly, to lie just completely knowingly lie.
Give me an
about
example of a
certain aspects
bold,
of the bill.
straight-out lie coming out of the Democrats.
Okay, I'll give.
I'm
hang
not
on.
doubting
I'll
you.
give
I'm
like
just
10.
curious.
No, okay, all right. I actually have a list because I made a video about it today.
Go for it.
First of all, yes. First of all, tax increases in the middle class, which is, from my knowledge, from reading both the committee version and the Senate version. Again, I have not read the reconciliation version
Yep.
because it's impossible to read a bill in an
Sure.
hour. That's a flat out lie.
Well, what do you mean by
biggest
tax
lie,
increases? Because it's not necessarily a lie. So if you live in California or in New York, your taxes are in certain bands. Your taxes might have gone up because your state tax is so high, and now you can't deduct it. Your effective tax rate might have gone up if you're in the middle class.
Well, let me qualify that because I thought you might say something like that. What they're saying is people making below $50,000 verbatim, people who make below $50,000 will not experience a tax reduction, and that if they do, it might be $7 a month.
Yeah, that's bullshit. So yeah, Democrats are lying. I mean, I've been going through the headlines and I've been seeing a bunch of these just stupid, over the top, panicky kind of lies. I mean, I'm not particularly impressed by this tax bill. Particularly,
No, I'm not either.
Except with the corporate tax reduction, which I think is substantial and a good move, although it could have been much better by taking away all the loopholes and all the things. But yeah, I mean, the Democrats always lie about Republican bills, and the Republicans always lie about Democrats' bills.
Absolutely. Now, I just want to qualify something real quick because this is a sentiment that keeps coming up, and it drives me absolutely up the wall because I guess you would qualify this under metaphysics, but they keep saying tax cuts for the rich is stealing money from the poor.
Yeah, I know.
So I don't know how in the world you could square that, and they're able to say it over and over and over and over again.
Yep.
I don't know what scenario or what worldview would make you come to that conclusion.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right, and they, it just shows, and unfortunately both political parties do this. They manipulate the facts to achieve their political agenda. Both sides do it. It's disgusting. It's one of the things that make me hate both of them almost equally. Although I hate the Democrats generally. I mean, I hate them both.
Me too.
Yeah, it's despicable. But I appreciate the fact that you're reading these bills. I mean, it's great to have somebody actually taking the time, because I know for a fact that none of the politicians do. I mean, you remember how the Republicans made fun of Nancy Pelosi when she said, we'll find out what's in the Obamacare bill after we read it?
And they did the same thing with the American Health Care Act?
Yes, and then they did the same thing with the tax bill. The Republicans did this exact same thing with the tax bill. How many of them have actually read it? Almost none of them have read it. But it's all about the tribe. It's all about Republicans. Republicans always do no wrong. Democrats do no wrong. It's so anti-thinking and anti-being objective. All right, thanks, Michael. Really appreciate the call. We've got 2 more callers, and then we'll call it quits for the day. We're already cutting it close here. Hi, you're on the Yaron Brook Show. Who's this?
Hi, Aaron. This is Andre from London.
Hey, Andre. It's very late or early in the morning where you are.
Yes, it's 3 o'clock in the morning.
3 in the morning. All right.
I had a question about the legitimacy of taxes, because there were really good arguments that we shouldn't have very high taxes, because it lets people keep more of their money, it encourages enterprise. But then I've also heard another argument on the show, which is that if your neighbours come up to you and put a gun to your head and say, hey, we'd like to take a percentage of your income, that would be illegitimate. Yes. And I wanted to present to you for critique a sort of a counter argument to that, which is, imagine when the neighbours come up to me, there was no consent. They just said, we're going to force this on you. Yes. If you imagine a private establishment, if you imagine a strip club, for example, and the strip club says to me when I go to it, if I'm a stripper, they say, if you want to work here, we'll provide the
Sure.
security.
Sure.
And
So there's a
nice work
voluntary
environment,
agreement.
We'll take a percentage.
Yep.
Right. So it's completely consensual. So I put it so therefore that tax on my salary, if they say we'll take 50% of your stripping, then I would say that would be consensual, therefore
Sure.
legitimate. And if
Sure.
they said, and by the way, part of the deal is we have these bouncers here, and if you try to leave without
they kick
giving
you
us
out.
our 50%,
Sure.
well, and they'll take the money off me before they
Yep.
kick me out. They won't just let me walk
Yep.
away. And so, couldn't you see America as kind of one big strip club? Where
No.
you're
I mean,
almost-
I mean, that
and
would be
you're
that would be
told-
kind of scary. That would be very scary. But no, and this is the falsehood of the whole idea of a social contract, and kind of Rousseau's idea that you're buying into some social contract and there's a contractual obligation to accept what the majority determines when there isn't. So you're born with rights. So let me be clear about my argument against taxes, and then I'll get to your point. I think taxes are immoral. I think they're a violation of individual rights. I think they're a use of coercion. And I do not make the utilitarian argument to reduce taxes. In my view, taxes should be reduced because I want to live in a society where theft is minimized. Now, I know I cannot live in a society where theft is zeroed out, where it's eliminated completely. So I'll take less theft over more theft any day. And that's why I'm for lower taxes. But why isn't it like, let's take away the strip club idea. Let's just use it. Why isn't it like a contract? Why can't we view it as a private association where you basically have a contract, and the contract is you pay X amount of money to your neighbor so he can have his surgery, and if not, the bouncer comes and puts you in jail. And the reason is that you didn't voluntarily agree to it. That you don't, by being born into a country or by emigrating into a country, you don't necessarily accept the rules and laws of the country. You are born free. You are born with rights. You have rights when you enter the United States. And the government has no right to take away those rights from you. And yes, you can help your neighbor. If it's if it's a voluntary thing, then you can join an association. It was called in the 19th century, they were called mutual aid societies, where you and your neighbors got together on a voluntary basis. It wasn't all the neighbors. It was only the neighbors that wanted to. And they got together and they formed an association. And the agreement was that if one of the neighbors got sick, everybody would pool their money and pay off their health care bills. Things like that, right? Insurance kind of schemes that were localized around people who knew each other. There's nothing wrong with that. That is great, and that is voluntary. You actually consented to that specific arrangement. I have not consented to anything these congressmen pass in a tax bill. Nobody asked my opinion. I did not consent or not consent. So it is. You cannot, if you're going to wield force, you can only wield it when rights are being violated. That is, when some voluntary agreement has been violated, i.e. the strip club example you gave, the contract is being broken, or when somebody initiated force on somebody in some other way, right? I took out a knife on you. That's it. That's the only time the monopoly over the use of force has a legitimate excuse, if you will, to use force. Otherwise, I have rights. I am free. Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely.
You see, what I would say is, imagine that there's, I know this is unrealistic, but imagine that there were only, say, 30 million people living on Earth.
Yeah.
Which meant that if you wanted to go and start your own country somewhere, your own private country, and have rules like we'll take 50% of your income if you live here.
Yeah.
Then you could see how if I actively was born free in the middle of nowhere and I decided to go to one of those private countries, then I would obviously have consented. Now, as you point out, if you happen to be born in one of those private countries, well, you didn't consent, but then isn't it allowable for the country to say, well, okay, we understand you didn't consent, so you have an option.
No.
You can either stay here.
I mean, you're placing.
You can leave and go to another country.
I'm going to cut you short. I don't have a lot of time to get into this. So we might want to do a living objectivism when I have more time to discuss this, because it's a good discussion and it's good points you're making. No, you're placing the country above the individual. You're placing the country, the will of the majority, above the rights of the individual. I am born free in a sense that I'm born with the rights. My nature requires a certain type of life for me. What the government is doing is violating the rights of everybody, and every time a new baby's born, they're violating that baby's rights instantaneously, but from that moment. And they have no right to do that. They have no right to use coercion. I mean, you could say, what right do you have to challenge Nazi Germany if you're a Jew born into Nazi Germany? It's Nazi Germany, right? They have a right to kill you right at the bat, right off the bat. Now, you would say what they should do is give you an option. But why? You were born in their land. They have primacy. They decide the rules. And the rule is Jewish, like in the Old Testament, Jewish firstborns are killed instantly. And you were born into that law, into that rule. So that has to apply. No, the point is that the natural rights tradition tried to apply, and that Ayn Rand, I think, refines, is your nature requires certain rights. Your nature requires you to be free. It's a feature of human nature that he must be free so that he can be moral, pursue his happiness, and live a moral life. And therefore, it's the job of government to get out of the way. And infringing rights, whether the infringing of rights came before you were born or after you're born, or it's changed while you're still alive, all of that is infringing rights and therefore wrong and out.
So you're effectively saying it would not be ever legitimate, even if we had infinite land, for anyone to ever set up a private country with private land that said, by the way, if you're born here, we won't.
That's right.
We'll allow you to leave if at any point. Okay.
That's right. So the only thing you could do is, so for example, if you had a commune, so I always say under capitalism you can be a communist. You can start your own commune, as long as everybody who joins the commune is there voluntarily, and that when a child reaches 18, they can leave, but you can't force them to stay on that private land. Yes. But a country is not private land. The commune has to be land that they buy, but there still has to be a country in which rights are protected. You can start your own
private country.
What's that?
Couldn't there be a private country?
No, they can't be a private country. No, they can't be private countries. This is my disagreement with the anarchists. They can't be private countries. Countries are by definition a collection of people living under a particular rule of law where the government has a monopoly over the use of retaliatory force. And that's not private. That's not private. You don't own the country. It's not a corporation. And it couldn't be a corporation, because think about a corporation. Corporation has to be governed by rules, by laws. The laws are external to the corporation. So there has to be a system of law that defines what a corporation is and how a corporation functions and the contracts within the corporation. The laws are not within the corporation. The laws outside the corporation. So there has to be a government above the corporation, above the private entity, that defines what private property is and protects what private property is, and settles disputes among entities within the corporation. It can't all be internalized into. There has to be an authority in that one realm of human existence. All right, we could go on with this debate for a while, and we should, so we'll have to pick this up on a different show. Thanks a lot, Andre. Appreciate you calling and appreciate you listening at 3:30 in the morning.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, the last caller, and let's try to make this short. Hi, you're on the Yaron Brook Show. Who's this? Hello?
Aloha, it's Stuart.
Hey, Stuart. Short, because I'm over time.
Okay, so I want to ask you about criticizing the customs in other cultures versus racism, because whenever you criticize Islamic doctrine, or you say it's good we're not hunter-gatherers anymore, people on the left, like Glenn Greenwald, say that that's racist.
Yeah, but
that's, of course, I object to that.
Yeah, but that's because they view they view people only in terms of race. They cannot abstract anything other than race. And also because they know that racism is such a lethal weapon, they use the term all the time. But of course, it's not racism to criticize another culture. I mean, again, I think the whole idea of race is, and I talked about this yesterday, I think, yesterday or the day before.
I can't hear.
No, you're criticizing a culture. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, because I noticed there are cases where people have this visceral hostility toward these other groups of people, but they can't just come out and say it. So they criticize those other people's customs as a type of code. For instance, when this famous golfer lost against Tiger Woods in golf, he got really mad. So he went up to these reporters and he said, Tiger Woods is going to go home and eat fried chicken. Because eating fried chicken is associated with black people. Yeah,
so that's the thing, that you can confuse the criticism of culture with racism. So sometimes it is racism, but it doesn't have to be racism. It depends on what you're criticizing and how you're criticizing it. So, I think I see a lot of people saying things like, Islam is a barbaric religion, and they stop there, and they don't, why is it barbaric? In what way is it different than Christianity? Now, I think it is a barbaric religion, and I think it is different than Christianity, specifically in its modern formulation. But you have to be able to articulate the case. So because there's so much superficiality out there, visceral hatred, rather than rational argument against a particular position, people confuse it with racism because racism is visceral and emotional and it has the same kind of characteristics. And I know people who hate Muslims, Islam, in the same way as racists hate blacks, let's say. So just because somebody hates Islam doesn't mean they're right. It depends on why they hate Islam. I hate Islam, but I can rationally articulate the argument. I don't hate every Muslim. I hate the ideology of Islam. I hate the religion of Islam. And I can articulate exactly why I hate it. And then that's the way it needs to be argued. So it's when people who hate, let's say, Islam behave like racists, they're often somewhat justifiably lumped in with the racists. But that's on them. They have to grow up. If you're going to criticize Islam, do it properly. If you're going to criticize the left, do it properly. If you're going to criticize anybody, if you're going to criticize Black Lives Matter, I know a lot of people who criticize Black Lives Matter, and they go so overboard that their criticism you start thinking, oh, well, maybe they are racist, because they're not doing it objectively. They're not doing it based on facts. They're not doing it rationally. So I'm for being objective and being rational in your criticism of these things that deserve criticism. All right. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the support. And I forgot to take any commercial breaks today. All right. We went a little over today, but you see you're getting extra Yaron, Brook, which means you should up your contribution to Patreon. Those of you who have not contributed yet to Patreon, go do it now. And cool. I'll talk to you all tomorrow. We'll have a whole new set of topics to cover in the news as we do the Yaron Brook news briefings. Talk to you tomorrow. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the support.